This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
Divide deepens. The fight between Apple and the FBI moves to Capitol Hill. And now lawmakers are starting to take sides.
Super Tuesday for stocks. The Dow soars. The Nasdaq has its best day this year as March comes in like a bull on Wall Street.
Crown jewel, why today's Texas vote is the biggest prize for presidential hopefuls. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, March 1st.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Well, the bulls charged Wall Street to start the month of March, and one of the biggest contributors to the 300-plus point gain on the Dow was Apple. And today, that company's lead attorney made his way to Capitol Hill to make his case and the company's against the government and the FBI's efforts to get Apple to unlock an iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino shooters. But it wasn't just Apple that had the microphone at the crowded House Judiciary Committee hearing. So did the FBI director, James Comey, and the war of words intensified.
The FBI is not some alien force imposed upon America from Mars. We are owned by the American people. We only use the tools that are given to us under the law. And so our job is simply to tell people there is a problem. Everybody should care about it. Everybody should want to understand if there are warrant-proof spaces in American life, what does that mean? And what are the costs of that, and how do we think about that?
Some of you may have an iPhone in your pocket right now, and if you think about it, there's probably more information stored on that device than a thief could steal by breaking into your house. The only way we know to protect that data is through strong encryption.
Eamon Javers is covering the story for us tonight. Eamon, how was the FBI director received on the Hill today?
You know, Tyler, it was fascinating to watch this. He was received very well. A number of the members went out of their way to praise him, even as others were criticizing him and his actions here in this Apple case. This is not one of those issues that slices and dices based on those traditional Republican and Democrat party lines that we're so used to up here on Capitol Hill. Ironically, it's an election year, so it's likely that nothing will happen, but you do get the sense that some of these lawmakers would like to make some law here that would overtake the 1789 All Writs Act that the government is using here, have some more modern law that would be in place that would imagine the consequences of these kinds of decisions.
We heard a little bit a moment ago on what Apple's general counsel said, but what else did you hear from him today?
Well, you know, he started off in a very defensive position. He said that, of course, Apple doesn't have any sympathy for terrorists, and of course it has great respect for law enforcement. But Apple came into this hearing with a wind at its back here in many ways because of this court ruling in New York State yesterday, in which case a magistrate judge said that Apple was in fact right to resist the government and that the government was overstepping its boundaries under that 1789 All Writs Act. So Apple very much had a home court advantage here, given that the court ruling so far have been going in their direction.
I spoke earlier today to Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who is with a Republican member, I believe it's Mike McCall, pushing for a commission to look into this matter of privacy. And he said, Eamon, that he really wishes Congress had got its head around this problem years ago, that we're now sort of late to the party on it.
Yeah, and Congress is always late to the party, particularly when it comes to advanced technology, right? A lot of these members of Congress are not the most technologically adept themselves. These are not people who are at the bleeding edge and fully aware of exactly what's going on in cyberspace. So it takes them a while to process this and understand it, and that's what's so frustrating to law enforcement here. They want to move quickly at the FBI and get access to this phone because they are in hot pursuit of potential additional terrorists. They want to know who else the San Bernardino shooters were talking to, where else they were, and what they were doing in some of the missing hours here. This process is going very slowly, and it could take a very long time before they get access to any information, if any at all.
All right, Eamon, thanks very much. Eamon Javers reporting from our bureau in Washington.
The Dow soars on this first trading day of March, which historically starts one of the best times of the year for stocks. Higher oil prices and solid economic reports, which we'll have more on momentarily, put investors in an optimistic mood. By the closing bell, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rocketed 348 points to 16,865. The Nasdaq rose 131 points, its best day this year, and the S&P 500 added 46, the second best gain of 2016. As for crude, prices settled above $34 a barrel, helped by word that Russian oil firms will not increase their output this year. Mary Thompson has more on this March 1st rally.
Well, the month of March coming in like a lion on Wall Street, stocks surging as higher bond yields gave a lift to beaten down financial stocks, and gains in oil provided added fuel, helping to send the Dow up over 300 points. While Tuesday's readings on construction spending and manufacturing activity here in the U.S. were not blockbuster numbers, they were stronger than expected, giving the bulls another reason to buy. The market's gains also coming as the European markets rallied on expectations the European Central Bank will be unveiling more stimulus for the Eurozone's sluggish economy sometime next week. Tuesday's strong rebound certainly welcome, though traders would like to see further confirmation the U.S. economy is gaining strength. From the New York Stock Exchange, I'm Mary Thompson for Nightly Business Report.
It may have been chilly outside, but February was a hot month for auto sales. Consumers returned to showrooms thanks to a healthy economy and low gas prices. In fact, February's sales soared to a 15-year high for that month. Of the big three, Ford sales up 20%, beating estimates. Chrysler, an increase of nearly 12%. GM's results disappointed, however, with a decline of 1.5%. Phil LeBeau takes a look at what drove demand.
America's love affair with SUVs, trucks, and crossover utility vehicles shows no sign of slowing down. Ford, Fiat Chrysler, and Nissan all posted much better than expected sales thanks to strong SUV demand. Then there's General Motors, which surprised analysts with sales falling 1.5%, well below the gain in monthly sales many forecasted. What happened? GM says it decided to cut less profitable fleet sales. Those are sales to rental car companies, corporations, and government agencies. As GM cut that business, Ford stepped in, with more than a third of its business last month coming from fleet sales. Regardless of the buyer, February showed SUVs and pickups remain red hot. Jeep sales shot up 23%, while Toyota had a second straight month of record truck sales. Keep in mind, January and February are the two slowest months of the year for auto sales. So while business has been good, few are excited. That could change as we roll into spring, where strong sales could set the stage for another record year in the auto industry. Phil LeBeau, Nightly Business Report, Chicago.
Construction spending reached its highest level in 8 years. Weakness in home building was offset by a solid rebound in non-residential activity and government projects. The Commerce Department reported a 1.5% increase in January, an indication to some that the economy regained momentum at the start of the year after a sluggish fourth quarter.
So, do today's better-than-expected economic data set the stage for a strong jobs report Friday? That's the question. Steve Leisman has the answer.
While the nation focuses on the presidential race, markets are keeping a close eye on the economy with a major week for economic data ahead that culminates Friday with a critical jobs report. The first data out of the box was mildly positive today. Car sales and construction spending were strong, and the downturn in manufacturing, well, it didn't get worse. The ISM Manufacturing Index actually beat Wall Street expectations, rose to its highest level in 5 months, and is now just barely below the expansion line. That is, it's now only contracting a little bit. But the big data is yet to come. Despite fears that the U.S. economy is softening and that weak overseas growth will drag down the U.S. economy, Wall Street is still banking on a strong February jobs report. The consensus is for 200,000 jobs. That's up from 151,000 in January. The unemployment rate expected to remain steady at 4.9%. The optimism was buoyed by the Paychex Small Business Index today.
The good news here is that we are seeing it 2 months in a row an increase in the job growth rate in small businesses under 50 employees, and it's across the country. We were seeing a little under 2% wage growth for many months. Now we're seeing it closer to 3%. So we definitely have seen the wage per hour go up pretty strongly here in the last couple of months.
The concern is that job cuts announced during the recent poor earnings season from the big companies lie in front of the economies and could dampen job growth in the months ahead. Recent market volatility and growth concerns led New York Fed President Bill Dudley to suggest he is not in a rate hiking mood. Dudley said in China, quote, "The balance of risk to my growth and inflation outlooks may be starting to tilt slightly to the downside." Yet today's market rally, which began with Dudley's downbeat comments, accelerated with the better economic news. That could suggest the market is more interested in better growth rather than more Fed stimulus. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Leisman.
Still ahead, the simple but somewhat shocking reason why the U.S. throws away billions of dollars worth of cancer drugs a year. The stakes are high this Super Tuesday, and no place is that more true than in Texas, which is one of a handful of states hosting contests in the biggest day for the 2016 primary season. And as Hampton Pearson reports from Houston, the focus is on Texas for good reason.
After a lot of careful deliberation, I've decided to vote for myself.
Senator Ted Cruz had the luxury of casting his Super Tuesday ballot in his hometown Houston precinct. Afterwards, Cruz told a media horde he expects to win and is ready to take on Donald Trump one-on-one.
It is all about delegates. Tomorrow morning, what is likely to happen is Donald Trump is likely to have a whole bunch of delegates. We're likely to have a whole bunch of delegates, and I think there will be a big drop-off for the rest of the field.
Texas is the biggest Super Tuesday prize. 155 delegates up for grabs on the Republican side. To get all the delegates, Cruz needs to get at least 50% of the vote. But voters we talked to are both fascinated and furious with Donald Trump.
He's the one who's going to turn this country around. He has no endearment to anybody. And the more people talk bad about him, the more people love him.
We do not know what he stands for because he doesn't tell us what he stands for. He just says he's going to make us rich again, make us great again. He just, puts platitudes out there without detail.
A Texas-sized record turnout is expected in the GOP primary, with more than 1 million votes already cast in early voting. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Hampton Pearson in Houston, Texas.
We're happy to say that John Harwood is here on the set with us now to talk more about this evening's decisive voting. The focus tonight, I think, rightly is on Texas and Ted Cruz. This feels like a must-win home game for him. But let's talk about Mr. Rubio. Does he have to win something tonight to remain relevant, or does it matter?
He doesn't have to, and he has not claimed that he's going to win any state tonight. He'd love to break through and make some progress, win some delegates in places like Virginia and Tennessee, have somewhat more moderate electorates. But the real last stand for Marco Rubio is going to be on March 15th. And when Florida has a winner-take-all primary, just like John Kasich's Ohio has a winner-take-all primary, each of them, to stay in the race, have got to win their home states. Tonight, Ted Cruz has got to take care of business in Texas.
And what about on the Democratic side? Where does this leave Bernie Sanders if, as expected, Secretary Clinton wins the majority of states or the majority of delegates?
Well, it is quite likely that she will do both, because if you look at the pre-election polls, she's way ahead in most places. But Bernie Sanders has vowed to continue his campaign. Mm-hmm. He's running not that far behind her nationally, and so he's got an audience. He can take it to Midwestern states that follow, like Ohio and Michigan, which comes on the 8th, and Florida as well. So he's going to sustain his campaign. His chances for the nomination don't look great at this moment.
Can Cruz win in other states beyond Texas?
He hopes so. Well, look, this is the SEC primary that he's talked about all along, the southern states, where the most conservative voters are. So he needs to show strength, and he's been trying to in places like Oklahoma, places like Alabama, although he took a blow when Jeff Sessions was endorsing Donald Trump the other day. That's an ally of Ted Cruz in the Senate, so that hurt him. But we'll see what he can come up with tonight. If his vaunted voter identification and targeting program can succeed, maybe he'll surprise and win more delegates than we think.
There's been talk out there about the fractured Republican Party because of Mr. Trump and the influence that he has had on this campaign. How do they repair that, if indeed it is fractured?
Well, it's very difficult to repair damage of the nature that he is suffering right now, because when you look at the kind of people who are condemning him in very harsh moral terms, Meg Whitman, the executive, former political candidate herself. Christie Whitman, former governor of New Jersey. Mitt Romney came out and said it was disgusting that Donald Trump had not condemned the KKK the other day. Those present a moral divide in the party that makes it difficult for Trump to build his coalition and keep Republicans from defecting.
There was supposed to be 3,000 emails or thereabouts released last night of Mrs. Clinton's. So little has been heard about that. Did they even get released?
Yeah, they were released.
But there's nothing on it today.
No.
I haven't seen anybody pick up on it.
Well, they did not have any of the highest secrecy classification kinds of material that people have been looking at. You know, the argument against her jeopardizing national security is that she was too cavalier in what she was using on this private server. Whatever the strength of that case, it was not heightened by the release today.
Of these particular emails.
Of these particular emails.
John Harwood, thanks.
You bet.
Have a good long night, I'm sure.
Honeywell International drops its bid for United Technologies, and that is where we begin tonight's market focus. The more than $90 billion bid was removed after Honeywell said UTX refused to participate in talks. The news comes after United Technologies said last week the merger would be, quote, irresponsible for its shareholders and would never be approved by antitrust regulators. Shares of Honeywell shares gained more than 4% to 105.87. United Technologies dropped more than 1.5% to 95.05. Barclays says that it will sell its African subsidiary and cut its dividend in half for the next 2 years. The company's CEO stands by the, quote, very difficult decision to close the UK bank's non-core business and wants the company to move forward.
We do need to get the restructuring behind us to focus on the core franchise of Barclays. We have a great transatlantic bank that has a consumer business, a corporate business, and an investment banking business.
Shares of Barclays fell nearly 6% to $8.89. Dollar Tree said sales rose in its fourth quarter, but that wasn't good enough to meet analysts' targets. The discount retailer also missed on earnings, citing impacts from the strong dollar. The forecast for the year doesn't look promising either. The company sees earnings missing estimates and said it expects same-store sales to stay in the low single digits. Dollar Tree shares were up 2% to $82.03.
The luxury retailer Kate Spade saw revenue rise in its latest quarter, but despite beating some of its competitors, the company missed analyst estimates and lowered guidance for the year. Shares of Kate Spade were up 11% to $21.99. Yahoo's annual 10K filing showed that the tech giant may need to write down the remaining value of Tumblr. That's the micro-blogging company it purchased for more than $1 billion just 2 years ago. Last month, Yahoo said it was writing off $230 million of Tumblr's value. Despite that news, or maybe because of it, getting it bad news out of the way, Yahoo shares rose 3% to $32.80. Shares of Tesla went the other way. They fell after the online investment website Citron Research said it was shorting the automaker's stock, citing supply and demand problems. Last month, Tesla said it expected to deliver between 80 and 90,000 new vehicles in 2016. Tesla shares ended the day down about 3% at $186.35.
$3 billion worth of cancer drugs wasted every year. And according to a new study, it happens for one simple reason. Drug manufacturers package single-dose vials that contain more medicine than some patients need. The New York Times reported on a study conducted by researchers at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and published in BMJ, formerly known as the British Medical Journal. The Times reporter, Gardner Harris, joins us now. Gardner, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
As I understand it, these vials of cancer medicines are larger so that they can accommodate the larger patient, you know, the 6'2" guy that weighs 250 pounds. But that's the only way they're packaged. And so if you're a smaller patient, you end up you're paying for medicine that you never get a chance to use. Is that correct?
Right. So particularly if you're a woman, and particularly if you're a small woman, if you're getting a cancer treatment right now, the likelihood is, and you don't know this because nobody tells you it, is that you're buying this extra large quantity of cancer medicine, and they take just a little bit out of the vial, and then they chuck the rest of the vial out.
Because they can't reuse it for safety reasons, right?
Right, they can't reuse it. And so you're actually, not only is your insurer paying for it, but many people have drug copays. And of course, these drugs are thousands of times worth their weight in gold. So they're extremely valuable. And oftentimes the copay just for the patients can be a few $1,000s. You know, the new price for cancer drugs is about $190,000 a year. So 20% of that, which is the standard copay, can be $40,000 just for the copay. And if you're a small woman, there's a huge share of the $40,000 that you're paying out of your pocket is actually going straight into the trash. And so it's a real concern.
You used the phrase, incredibly valuable medicines that cost millions to invent and produce, and yet they're throwing away these incredibly valuable medicines. Why don't they bottle these things or provide them in smaller vials so that the 6'5" guy, the J.J. Watt of the world, can take 1, 2, 3 vials instead of having just one?
Well, so the companies themselves sort of say that they're offering a value by just having one sort of size. And some companies suggest that if they offered their drugs in more than one vial size, that it's possible that nurses could confuse things and there could be a safety issue. The problem with that argument is that there's lots of medicines out there that these companies themselves provide in multiple vial sizes. And remember, guys, this past year when there was this great controversy about Daraprim, Martin Shkreli and Turing Pharmaceuticals, and they jacked up the price of a certain drug by 50-fold. And that whole controversy involved about $200 million. Well, Merck, with its cancer drug, just by changing the vial size, is going to make 10 times that amount. Right. They're going to make about $2.5 billion over the next 10 years. So it's a huge issue.
I think what's also interesting about your story is that the medicines are delivered in smaller vials in Europe. Europe does not have this issue because
That's exactly right.
The government is more involved in the negotiation of drug pricing. Is the U.S. going to start paying attention to that particular method?
Well, so the problem is that the FDA has never been given any sort of authority from Congress to even consider cost. So when I talked to the FDA, and it sort of took a while to get to this answer, the FDA says, look, we don't really care about waste unless we believe that it's going to lead to some sort of safety issue. So basically, the vial sizes have to be huge, and it has to sort of lead nurses to maybe think that, okay, well, they could maybe treat several patients out of a single vial. The FDA doesn't want to do that for safety reasons. But if you want to sell a vial that, is good enough for, actually in the story, it's a 6'6", 250-pound person, the FDA is not going to argue with you, again, because they don't think about cost. So either somebody needs to give the power to the FDA to consider cost, or the Medicare program, which of course pays for much of these medicines for taxpayers, has to essentially tell drug makers, we're not going to do this anymore.
All right. It's a great article to read, very insightful. Gardner Harris with the New York Times. Thank you for joining us.
Coming up, location, why luxury real estate listings in some areas are stalling.
Twenty 2016 started with a swift kick in the gut to the U.S. stock market, and that was after a few free falls in the fall. And it's those relatively lower equity prices that may be playing into lower sales of luxury homes, depending, that is, of course, on where you live. Diana Olick reports.
Oh, the best is the his and her bathroom upstairs and the his and her closets.
No, the best is that this $5.7 million D.C. listing had an offer in barely 10 days.
Demand is higher, even though the stock market has, gotten in the way and snowstorms have gotten in the way. But I think demand is there. People are feeling very good about the economy.
That may be the case in high-end D.C. homes today.
And this is hers.
This is hers.
This is literally the Sex and the City closet, right?
Totally.
But it is not the case nationally. The recent correction in stocks has only put an exclamation point on the strong correlation between the stock market and sales of million-dollar-plus homes. The two did diverge during the housing boom in the mid-2000s, but that had all to do with loose credit.
coming out of the recession, the S&P index doubled over the next 6 years, and so did high-end home sales, defined as million-plus sales.
More recently, since its peak in May of last year, the S&P index fell 10% as of mid-February. That was matched by a 15% decline in the share of million-dollar-plus home sales. In New York City especially, but also in San Francisco, where the local economies are reliant on financial markets, luxury home sales are slowing and supply is rising. Also in Southwest Florida, where the real estate market is fueled by wealthy retirees from the Northeast and Midwest, luxury sales have stalled.
The high end is impacted by what's happening in the equity markets, but also by the economic base.
Here in D.C., though, the market has a much more steady denominator of government and the high-priced lawyers and lobbyists who surround it. They are still buying luxury homes in force.
I actually think the stock market is good for my business.
Really?
Because I think people are going to really think about divesting a little bit and putting it into something they can enjoy.
In other words, bricks and mortar over bulls and bears. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Diana Olick in Washington.
And before we go, let's take another look at the rally on Wall Street. The Dow rocketed 348 points, NASDAQ up a big 131, best day so far this year, and the S&P 500 added 46.
On that note, that's it for Nightly Business Report tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
And thanks from me as well. I'm Tyler Mathisen. Have a great evening, everybody, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow night.